Welcome into the February 15th edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. It's game day, ladies and gentlemen. The Blackhawks are in town. We got a big update on Auston Matthews regarding his status in tonight's game. Meanwhile, a big shakeup on the blue line, and I've got some damning stats to suggest why this is happening. All that more coming up on today's edition of Locked On Leafs.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, your one-stop shop for all things Leafs. I'm your host, Mike DiStefano from TSN 1050 Toronto Radio, also known as Al's brother on TSN's Overdrive and TSN 1050's Leafs Lunch. Joining me, it's my co-host Dave Morassutti from Sportsnet, also a writer for the NHLPA. Locked On Leafs, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast, so be sure to subscribe for free wherever you get your podcast from. Also up on YouTube, we've got new content coming out each and every day, Monday through Friday, so please subscribe to us and get that Leafs content directly to you. Hit the little notification bell as well so that you know when the new pods drop each morning. Dave, we got another game tonight. There has not been a lot of hockey being played in Leafs Nation, I guess, since the start of the month. This is going to be just the fourth game of the month, and we're more than halfway through it, I guess, technically, with only being a 28-day month. It's just the fourth game, but we got the Chicago Blackhawks in town tonight taking on the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, this lack of action right now, and I kind of brought it up on the last show, is that now the Tampa Bay Lightning right there with them. Those games in hand really did come in handy for good old Tampa and their race for second in the Atlantic Division.
It did, and they defeated the Colorado Avalanche last night, and I believe that puts them in a tie with the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I believe that, I think they have, based on points percentage, would be ahead of them with still a game in hand, correct?
Yep, one game in hand, so they'll have a better percentage in the standings.
Yeah, so you wake up this morning with the Toronto Maple Leafs in third place in the standings and in points percentage, in both, realistically, for the first time in a long time, so that's not good. But they do take on one of the league's worst teams with a chance to pick up 2 full points. That said, Dave, picking up 2 points against some of the league's worst teams has not been the easiest thing of late for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Well, I guess it's really been a problem for a few years now. I don't know if you saw this stat that was floating around, but against the bottom 7 teams of the NHL this season, the Leafs have just 4 victories in 11 games. 4-4-3. In 11 games against opponents that are in the bottom 7 of the National Hockey League and firmly in the Bedard sweepstakes.
I'm curious to know how many of those are against the Montreal Canadiens.
I can tell you, if you give me a minute, I can tell you exactly what that breakdown is. If you want to talk for about 30 seconds while I find that information for you.
Yeah, it's just, you know what, I was listening, obviously, with Boots Brodro coming on the podcast with Kipper and Bourne. He was talking about how, it's one game. I feel like saying, Bruce, it hasn't been one game. It has been multiple games like this. And you're going to look, and if at the end of the season, the standings end the way they are, and people are, annoyed about the Leafs not having home ice and all those things, these games are going to be the exact reason why, because there's no they left themselves no margin for error when they lose these types of games.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have the records for the bottom 7 teams. I'll go in order from literally last to, let's be like 25th in the NHL. So the Blue Jackets just played them this past weekend, played both games, 1-1 against the Blue Jackets. Yet to play the Blackhawks. So tonight's the first game against Chicago, and then I think they have another game coming up on Saturday as well, or next week rather, or Sunday, right?
Back to back, Montreal Saturday, Chicago on Sunday.
Yeah, so they got Montreal Saturday and then Chicago Sunday. So they got both of their Chicago games this week, both must wins if you ask me. So far they haven't played them yet. So obviously it means a 0-0 record. Against the Ducks, they're 1-0-1. Against the Coyotes, they're 0-2-1. Against the Sharks, 1-0-1. They're 1-0 against the Canucks and 0-1-1 against the Montreal Canadiens this season, for a total record of 4-4-3 against the bottom dwellers in the NHL. And again, they play the 31st ranked team tonight. So what are we going to have in store for us? Who knows? That's the Leafs always like to give us heart attacks against games in which we assume they should be able to win. Like on paper, the Leafs should come in and absolutely murder and blow this team out of the water. Sometimes that just doesn't happen. I will say this, though. They did get some positive news. Auston Matthews looks like he might be returning to the lineup at that 3-week date that they thought he would return for. So that's a really good and positive sign that Auston Matthews could be returning here. He did take part in practice today. He was up on the top line for line rushes. He was on the power play, and he did speak afterwards. And he said, if all things, if I feel good tomorrow, then I should play. And that's the expectation. So Auston Matthews could be returning from that knee injury. That's clearly a really good thing, because I don't know about you, Dave. It was very evident that they were missing some sort of scoring touch with Auston Matthews out of the lineup the past few weeks.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say that, guys like Will Nylander, Mitch Marner tried to do their best. But at the center ice position, guys who had to be moved up in places they probably should not have been moved up, it showed. It showed in a lot of ways. Not only offensively, but defensively as well. Like, we talk about Auston Matthews and what he can do offensively. I think, people tend to underestimate what he can do on the defensive side as well.
I think that's changing. I think that changed last year, though, to be fair. But to your point, yeah, like Pontus Holmberg, he was moved up into the second line center role in that one game against Ottawa, and was quickly taken off that, because it was like, okay, you're not ready for this quite yet. Let's stick you back in the bottom six. And he is going to be the fourth line center tonight. Kerfoot had a run up there as well. And even Kerfoot, so I was looking up his numbers. Kerfoot has one goal in his last 18 games. That's just unacceptable for Alex Kerfoot, if you ask me. So that, and considering he was getting top 6 minutes for a majority of time while Matthews was out of the lineup, he's just flat out needs to produce more than that if he's going to be a focal point of this team going forward. Right now, he's currently slotted to remain in the top 6, because there was a big shakeup at practice today. I don't know if you saw the morning lines, but just a big shakeup overall. Like up front, Bunting with Matthews and Nylander, Kerfoot with Tavares and Marner. So Matthews and Marner were split up. Engvall, Camp, and Yarncroke are the third line, and then Zach Aston, Reese Holmberg, and Joey Anderson make up the fourth line. So Alex Steeves comes out of the lineup. Him and Wayne Simmons were we're skating as the extras. So a massive shakeup up front, a massive shakeup on the blue line, which we'll get to in just a moment. But just the fact that Matthews comes back into the lineup, and now all of a sudden, we're seeing a whole bunch of movement within this lineup. Does that surprise you that Marner or Matthews didn't come back and automatically get reunited with Marner? Now it's going to be Matthews and Nylander again.
A little surprising there. That part was a little surprising, because Nylander's been playing very well, right? You think that you want to keep him and Tavares together, but the one that surprised me the most was Kerfoot. Like, he had the really nice play on the Nylander goal in Saturday's game, but other than that, I don't like this. To me, Kerfoot has not shown that he can be a top 6 contributor, because it's not just a matter of chipping in defensively. What I liked about Cal Yarncroke was that he was doing things offensively. He was getting into the nitty-gritty areas in the front of the net to score, to put up some production there. So that one's perplexing, but I think that has more to do with getting Cal Yarncroke back with Camp, more so than it had to do with anything else there. But yeah, maybe they just feel like with there's something about Matthews and Martin together that they're not liking. They just aren't liking that duo right now, and maybe they just prefer Tavares and Marner. Like against the first game against Columbus, Tavares and Marner were really good together. So maybe they want to keep that together, and they feel like William Nylander, the way he's been playing, is going to help elevate Auston Matthews in his return to the lineup.
Yeah, I mean they played well, and honestly, when I look at these lines, I almost am getting to a point where I prefer them apart. To be honest with you, because I do like that two-pronged attack where you have Matthews and Nylander, and they have been able to feed off each other, and then Marner just makes Tavares a better player. Like he just simply does, and it's nothing. It's not a shot at Nylander. I just think Marner's more complementary in helping what Tavares does, and then obviously Kerfoot, you would hope for some sort of improvement there. And Yarncroc, I think they're going to get it. Like, I almost wonder if the fact that you're reuniting this third line that had, some time early in the season prior to Yarncroc's injury to get going, but didn't quite see much out of him. But then Yarncroc's been on the second line since he got back in late December. Now we'll get a chance to see what that third line looks like. Like, that's a pure checking line. And then they could bring a little, Yarncroc adds a little bit more offensive punch than the Andersons, the McMahons, that we've seen who've been filtering in on that third line a little bit. So I look at it now and I'm like, okay, you've got three lines that can somewhat score here. Like Kurt Engvall's put the puck in the back of the net a little bit lately. Obviously, I just talked about Yarncroc. You've got Marner and Tavares doing their thing. And now you add Matthews onto that top line with William Nylander and Michael Bunting, who I think he could start picking it up and start, scoring a little bit more again lately. You kind of have three decent scoring lines here heading into this game. Defensively, also a big shakeup there. And why don't we take a quick break and get back to it? There's one player who is expected to sit out tonight. Might come as a shock to some, might be a party to others, if you catch my drift. So I'll tell you who that is and why I believe this is probably a good thing going forward for the Maple Leafs. So I'll tell you that information in just a moment. But first, let me tell you about one of today's show sponsors, and that's your favorite sports book. It's FanDuel. It's midway point of the NHL season. It's here, and now's the perfect time to download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's America's #1 sportsbook because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back for your first bet if it doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to the point scores. You can even go ahead and guess your goal scorer shots or the puck line. For example, tonight's game against the Toronto Maple Leafs, I like the puck line for Toronto. It's juiced up a little bit to -2.5. But I think Toronto's going to roll. They really, really have to, if you ask me. So I think that is a pretty good play. You can make it on FanDuel. It's one of my favorite bets that I see here tonight. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at bigger payouts with the same game parlays. So don't miss your chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more. An official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. Toronto has Chicago in town tonight. Their first game of two meetings this week. They play again on Sunday on the second night of back-to-back. They've got a game against Montreal in the middle on Saturday. Really weird, though, because they're in Toronto taking on Montreal. And then it's a 6 p.m. Saturday game in Chicago. So they gotta cross the border and go play Chicago an hour earlier, like 23 hours later. It's going to be a hassle. It's going to be a hassle. That said, the Blackhawks were playing Montreal tonight, so the Leafs will have Chicago on night 2 of the back-to-back in this game, which is another reason why I think that they really better be prepared to play this game. You're coming off a loss against Columbus. You got ripped on by your coach post-game. I didn't get a chance to comment on it. I hope you touched. I know you touched on it. Absolutely tore into the players, which deservedly so. Now they've got to come and respond and hopefully just put an absolute ass whooping forward on the Chicago Blackhawks. So Matthews is going to probably be back in the lineup. They'll see how he feels in the morning. But all systems seem like they're good to go there, which is a big benefit for this team. Defensively, though, a big shakeup in on the blue line. So Riley and Brody remain together as the top pair. Mark Giordano and Timothy Liljegren as the second pair at practice today. Rasmus Sandin and Conor Timmins as the third pair. Justin Holl projected to be a healthy scratch in tonight's game. Dave, what do you make of that?
Well, in the last show, I did call out Justin Holl's play.
Yeah, it was abysmal on Saturday.
Terrible.
Absolutely abysmal.
I like it. I like it for a couple of reasons. One, it sends a message to Justin Holl. It also sends a bit of a message to the group that you're going to have a game like that, you're going to sit. And Justin Holl, you know what? It's a good thing, too, because it tells Conor Timmins as well. So here's an opportunity here. Justin Holl had a bad game. Let's see if you can have a better game than him. And maybe he stays out of the lineup a little bit longer. This is not, and it's funny because I was saying that Justin Holl hasn't been terrible from what he was at the start of the season. But at the same time, I feel like people have been so focused on Morgan Riley's play that Justin Holl has kind of been brushed a bit to the side. Because
that's a good point.
That's kind of how I feel like with Justin Holl. Like, to me, he plays on the penalty kill. Him and Giordano play that shutdown role. But I from what I'm seeing and watching him play, and I think Sheldon Keefe is probably seeing it too, he's not giving you anything.
No.
Like, he's not being physical. The penalty kill has not been very good by the standards that I think this team needs it to be. And that, like, there's no reason that you should give up 40 shots against the Columbus Blue Jackets and allow a player to just walk in front of the net untouched so he can deflect in a goal
multiple times. Like he was a -3 in that game, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think it was a needed. If anything, if it's just going to be a wake up call to him, I'm fine with that too.
I think that's what it is, honestly. Like, I don't think this is a situation where Holl becomes a seventh defenseman. Like, for that to happen, you would have to see some wizardry out of Conor Timmins in this game. Like, Sheldon Keefe spoke about it post practice today, and he said at times, Holl's play has slipped, but he wants to get Timmins in, and he said, "quote You're looking to take someone out, so don't give me a reason." Well, Justin Holl gave him a reason to take him out of the lineup Saturday night, and therefore he's not going to play. Spend a night up in the press box, which we saw this happen earlier this year, if you'll recall. Earlier in the season, Holl got, one little game. He had to go up in the press box and kind of watch and see what happened. And he played a lot better coming out of that, though. Like, it was the wake-up call that he needed, just kind of give his head a shake, a bit of a reset, if you will. And I think this is kind of, hopefully they're hoping that they can press the same button here and he can kind of get a quick reset, quick jolt, and get back to being, the player that he was in November, because he was playing some solid hockey. Like, when Brody and Riley went down, he and Giordano were playing some solid hockey. I don't think anybody can dispute that. There's a lot of haters out there that are going to just hate on Holl regardless, but they were playing really well. Not as great since roughly Christmas. I went and I took a peek at their numbers, and honestly, it's not been great. Christmas, New Year's, that pairing has gone downhill quite a bit. Justin Holl himself has been on the ice, Dave, for 23 goals in the last 20 games since the Christmas break. 23 goals he's been on the ice in the last 20 games. Holl and Giordano are a bottom 10 defensive pairing in the league in terms of goals against per 60 at 5-on-5 since Christmas. They've been on the ice for that's through 20 games, actually. Also giving up the 17th most scoring chances per 60 in that time among all defensive pairs. So it's not been great. And that's to go along with some of the boneheaded turnovers and the misplays that he's made as well. So, a quick seat in the press box for a game or two, and then you get him back out there, and hopefully he can turn his game around, because we've seen at his height he can what's the word I'm looking for? He can pretend to be a number 4 at the very least. Like, if you could dress him up as a 4, he's not like a legitimate 4, but he could work, right? We've seen it at his best, but he hasn't been that of late. So hopefully a quick reset and he can get himself back in order. Because I mean, one of two things: either Hall needs to severely improve his play down the stretch and through the playoffs, or they got to upgrade that position because Hall, the way he's played the last 20 games, that's not a winning formula when it comes to playing the playoffs against the Tampa Bay Lightning in a 7-game series where you're expecting him to be one of your shutdown pairs. Not gonna turn out very well for Toronto at the way he's playing right now.
No, and you saw the way that they played against Boston. Like the turnovers, just brutal play in their own end. Like
Mhm.
those things, they're gonna eat you alive. Teams like that, if you're gonna make those mistakes, and if you're Justin Holl and you're supposed to be that, you're not bringing offensive presence, then you got to make sure you're playing as much mistake-free hockey as you can. And right now, he has. I didn't realize the numbers were that bad. That to me is so
Dude,
alarming.
20 on the ice for 23 goals in the last 20 games. It's crazy.
Like I understand him and Giordano get the tougher assignments. I,
Mhm.
I I sympathize with that, but they're also not being asked to play 30 minutes a night, right? Like Justin Hall's not being asked to play egregious minutes. I understand he's probably playing more minutes than I think he should be,
Yeah.
just based on where he is in the lineup. But that's kind of where they are right now. And the only way you're going to change that is if he plays better, we find a better solution.
And could that possibly be a trade? Could it possibly be a trade? Or Liljegren gets his opportunity right now to go up and play top 4 minutes. Maybe Liljegren shows that he's ready for the task and he can kind of take that second pair spot, take those minutes from Justin Holl, and you drop Justin Holl to the third pair, or maybe you do go and get an upgrade. But I think there's a big opportunity for Timothy Liljegren here to really prove that he can be a bigger piece of the puzzle here for Toronto.
Yeah, I mean that you need. I constantly said that you need these guys to bring a different element. They need to raise the profile of this defense. Like the defense in last year's playoffs were good, but we need them to take a step, right? It's clear. Otherwise, you're kind of setting yourself up for a very similar end to what happened last year. Like it's okay to be good, but good enough, but we should try to find a way to up the ceiling, if anything.
Yeah, agreed. All right, we'll take one more quick break and we get back. Talk about what we're most intrigued by in tonight's matchup. What are you going to be keeping an eye on tonight? I've got a couple things in mind. I'm curious to get your thoughts. Leafs Hawks tonight. You can watch it. It's a big one. Toronto, they now need this because they're tied in the standings with Tampa, but a game more played, which means they're now in third place. So in order to keep up with Tampa, they got to get the 2 points. We'll chat about the game in just a moment. But first, Dave, tell them about one of our good show sponsors.
Yep. And if you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all of the fat and calories, then you got to try a Built Bar. Just got through. We're past the holiday season, past Valentine's Day, where maybe you indulged in some chocolates after you bought your significant other some chocolates. So maybe we try to go with something a little bit healthier, but actually still tastes good. And that is what makes Built Bar so great. They're covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. I'm not sure how they do it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is that they are healthy, only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar, with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait around to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club in the States. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart or Sam's Club and go and get yourself a box. If you go to the pharmacy counter at Walmart, you can get a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate or coconut puffs. If you go to Sam's Club, get a 13 bar box with hit flavors like brownie batter and churro. Thank me later. Of course, if you're one of those who continues to shop online, then make sure you go to builtbar.com and use the promo code locked on 15 and get 15% off your order. So that is promo code locked on 15 to get 15% off your order at builtbar.com.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. So Dave, big game tonight. Leafs and Blackhawks down at Scotia Bank Arena. There's a couple of things that I'm actually going to be keeping an eye on tonight, and not necessarily the game itself, because again, I fully expect Toronto to respond after that brutal performance Saturday night against Columbus and just mop the floor with the Chicago Blackhawks team. Granted, we've been here before. We've fully expected that, and, well, what happened on Saturday sometimes happens on those nights. That said, let's try and keep it positive here and just hope that Toronto does make that response with Matthews returning. Chicago on the second night of a back-to-back. Leafs should be very, very rested, not having played since Saturday. So I think there's a lot of things going in their favor. Oh, also, the Hawks are 31st in the NHL and just flat out suck. I think
got shut out by the Montreal Canadiens, who are not very good.
There you go. They got shut out by the Montreal Canadiens 4-0. They let Jonathan Drouin have a 3-point night.
Ew.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. What are you looking forward to seeing most tonight, though?
Well, obviously, Auston Matthews, seeing how that knee is looking. I mean, in practice, we kind of thought he was inching closer to returning just based on how he was practicing there. And obviously, go ahead.
I didn't expect for him to play in this game until I saw him in line rushes today. I was very I didn't expect this at all. I know he was practicing in a red sweater yesterday, but I fully did not anticipate him being ready to go to play in tonight's game. I thought, all right, let him not play the Wednesday, get a couple more practices in, and then let's get him into one of these games Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah, I was totally surprised when I saw that he went from being in a no contact red shirt, boom, he's in blue and he's on the top line again. And I'm like, okay, it's good. Obviously, we're not complaining about that. You just hope that, and Auston Matthews is usually one that's not going to rush himself back early from an injury. So, yeah, I'm curious to see if there's going to be any rust or anything like that.
Conspiracy theory time. Him coming back early. Yeah, him come back on time, actually. This is pretty much the 3-week timeline that he was originally given. But remember, it was minimum 3 weeks. So him coming back on time, as opposed to maybe giving him an extra couple of games like we initially thought would make a little bit more sense. Maybe after this weekend's back-to-back, he can get him back into the fold. How much of getting him back in as soon as possible you think has to do with when he went out, Tampa was not – they had I wouldn't say a comfortable lead on Tampa, but they had a lead on Tampa Bay. That's no longer the case leading into this game here.
Yeah, I mean the Leafs don't have the luxury of, coasting, right? And I don't think the Leafs were trying to coast, but the suggestion that, we don't need to rush our best player back, this and that, I think they also realized that, and I think Auston Matthews realizes he might not think that this is a big deal in terms of the standings. It's kind of a big deal. You do not want to be giving Tampa home ice. These are games they need to win. These are games that if you have Auston Matthews in, the chances of you winning these games go up quite drastically.
Yes, also home ice advantage. The odds of you winning on home ice also go up quite drastically. Something else that I'm looking forward to that we talked about, seeing Timothy Liljegren in his second pair role. He's not taking on overly tough competition against the Chicago Blackhawks, but still just to, kind of get a look and see how him and Gio look together. They looked good last year, right, at the end of the season, and I think that's where you saw Liljegren start to turn into an NHL defenseman. So reuniting him with Gio, I think, will be something I'll be keeping an eye on. And then there's a lot of trade candidates on the Chicago Blackhawks that if you want to do a little pre-scout to see, how these players play, if you think they would be, there's just a lot of intriguing names here. Like I'm thinking Max Domi is a guy who I think would be an intriguing name for the Maple Leafs. Sam Lafferty's a name that we've heard a lot. More of a depth player, but certainly a name that potentially, if they want to add some depth to the fourth line, he could be a guy. Defensively, you've got Connor Murphy, Jake McCabe. We've heard both of those names come up. McCabe a little more so of late than Murphy. And then obviously Patrick Kane is the big name out there. And I don't know if you heard Carlo Koliakovo's report. It wasn't a report. I will stop. I'm not going to call it a report, but he did say on First Up today that he was told by a source that Kane, if he wasn't going to go to New York, then Toronto was the next team on his list, pretty much, of teams that he'd be willing to go to. So maybe you want to keep an eye out on and see what Patrick Kane's doing. I know he's coming back from that injury. Is he as explosive, or is there a little bit of Foligno stench with this guy? There is a lot of concern over that hip with Patrick Kane and whether or not he'll be able to remain healthy the rest of the way. He came out and he did a little media tour the other day saying, "No, I'm good. I feel better than ever." The medicals kind of say something different, and the numbers you're putting up this year, Patty, say something a little bit different. So getting an up-close view of him tonight against Toronto, definitely something I'll be keeping an eye on.
You brought up what Carlo obviously said. I did see that floating around on Twitter there. There was also a gentleman who writes for NBC Sports Chicago, Charlie. I'm going to butcher this name completely.
Oh, I know exactly. I butchered it on air the other day on Leafs Lunch.
It seems Greek.
Honestly, I said I butchered it, and then I said Charlie from Chicago says.
This Charlie guy from Chicago. It's kind of got that feel to it, but
Charlie from Chicago.
So he actually when he did a piece on 7 trade deadline options for the Blackhawks and Patrick Kane. And when he was talking about Chicago, the Maple Leafs are a team I believe Kane would seriously entertain. They check so many boxes. Legitimate Stanley Cup contender. Well, I mean, depending on who you ask. An original 6 market. He loves the
big. They are, Dave. They are legitimate contenders. Come on now.
I think they're legitimate contenders, but the comment section in our podcast don't seem to suggest that.
Good point.
This was an interesting one. Close to his hometown, Buffalo, which would be an easy commute for his family. His dad doesn't like to fly, so they drive to and from Buffalo for Chicago home games. And obviously the big point here is a chance to play with Auston Matthews, who Kane is itching to play with, and obviously was one of Matthews' favorite players growing up.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to like about that deal. If Patrick Kane is healthy, that is the question. And we don't know. But again, they went down that path with Nick Foligno before where they rolled the dice on a guy who was injured, and it didn't work out in their favor. Does Kyle Dubas double down and do the same thing here? I don't know. What would it take to do that? I asked Darren Dreger today on my show on Leafs Lunch, could you see a scenario where basically he demands a trade to Toronto and they just take whatever Toronto's willing to give them just as a solid to Patrick Kane, because that's where he wants to go, and not to say that they're going to fleece him and give him a 7th round pick or anything like that. But, could he be had for a 2nd rounder and a prospect, or I don't know if it would take something ridiculous, kind of similar to the Taylor Hall trade a couple of years ago.
They're better. Hall, Claude Giroux.
Yeah.
And in some ways, Tarasenko's deal, some people thought the Blues didn't get much back. And the reason why is Tarasenko had a no trade clause.
Yeah.
He only really wanted to go to certain places. And I think that's the same thing with Patrick Kane. If you're trading Patrick Kane, I don't understand that if you're Chicago, you want to get a ransom back for Patrick Kane, but this is also not the Patrick Kane that scored 92 points last year.
I just don't know. Like, they're going to have to weigh it out. I don't know how many teams would be willing to give up top tier assets for a guy who they're not even sold will be able to last the end of the season. Like, there's some serious gripe on that hip. So they're going to have to dig into the medicals and see if there's legitimate concern there or if it's being drummed up a little bit by media, like Patrick Kane said. But what is he going to say, right? Like, obviously, he's going to try and promote himself as being healthy. Like, he's not going to come out and say, yeah, no, I'm pretty banged up, so, buyer beware. Like, he's not going to say that, right? But I think it is notable and it is interesting that it sounds as though he has interest in the Leafs. The question is, do the Leafs have interest in Patrick Kane, and at what price would they have interest in Patrick Kane? Like, if they could get him for dirt cheap, I'm sure they would. But what price does Chicago want? And what price would Chicago take as a minimum? I think that's kind of where this whole conversation is going to end up at some point.
Especially with the salary retention that will be needed. And I expect
double
contract or two.
Probably double retention, right? So you're going to have to pay another team some sort of asset to take another $2.5 million off the books.
Especially because there's not many teams that are going to be willing to do that.
No, there's not. That said, it's not actually $2.5 million. It's only, I don't know, 25% of what that would be, just based on how much cash is actually owed. And there could have even been signing bonuses, so who knows what the actual money is, but it's less than $2.5 million.
Really, daily cap hit right now is $3.25 million. Is what he is owed. The remaining, he had a $4 million signing bonus this year, so
he has 3.25 remaining on his cap.
Yeah.
Well, how much is remaining on his salary?
His base salary was 2.9. His total salary was 6.9. $4 million that was paid out in a signing bonus. So
right, so it'd be like 2.9 divided by, it'd be like 25% of that, right? So it's not as much money as it seems like it would be, right? So maybe it's not going to take a whole lot to find a second team to take that on for, a couple $100,000. Are you willing to buy a 4th round pick? Maybe there is a team out there who wants to get some draft picks and can afford to do that. Maybe a 3rd round pick or a B level prospect or something like that. Who knows? Kyle's gonna have to get creative though, because that's not the only ad. Because if he gets hurt, now you're screwed. So that's a luxury ad for me. You got to go out there and do something else additionally. And if you're doing that, then like maybe you can do something on the back end by bringing him in. I don't know, but we'll see. I didn't plan on having a Patrick Kane conversation today, but here we are. We had the Patrick Kane conversation, and we'll see where it ends. There's less than 3 weeks to the deadline. 2 weeks this Friday. Lots of conversations going to be had between now and then. We'll see how much Petty Kane dominates those conversations. All right, that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasts and platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. And make sure that you are subscribed to us both wherever you get your podcasts and also on YouTube as well. We'd love for you to leave a comment down below. Anything you got to gripe about what we said today? Any gripes that y'all have? Are you interested in Patrick Kane potentially becoming a Maple Leaf? What will the price have to be? Let us know in the comment section below. That'd be awesome. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. We will break down the Leafs and Blackhawks game. But until then, keep locked right here on Locked On Leafs.